Hey everyone. Hey Nick, how's it going?
Very well. How are you? You okay?
Good. Thanks for joining in what I can only assume is your evening. What is it, 6 o'clock for you in the UK?
Exactly that. Yeah. Literally on the money. So we're getting there. An absolute miserable day at that. So much as well.
Yeah, look at this guy. It is end of quarter, end of month, end of day, and he's joining to come talk about Revops with us today. So really appreciate it. We've got a lot of people in the session. Just housekeeping. Please post questions in the chat on the screen. Drop them into the LinkedIn, and we'll get them brought over. These conversations, I feel like, are always so much better when we have audience interaction and participation. But as we kick off today, Nick, would love to learn more about you. Let's talk about your background, your experience, and who's on the call today with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So fantastic to obviously be here and great to meet you. But yeah, background really started off many years ago now, but actually within kind of hospitality trade before then moving into much more kind of sales led roles. So I then actually went down the route of joining more startup organizations, helping them grow. So first organization I joined helped take that across 13 different countries. We grew that quite significantly. It was across the US, UK, and across Europe, and even into kind of UAE. I then finished up where I wanted to kind of achieve and get to with that. And before joining Celligence, when was that, early last year? So pretty much going through a similar trend at the moment. So based out of Cardiff from a HQ point of view, but then we've got New York and Tampa as offices. So it's very much focused in terms of continued growth for us at the moment. But I very much summarize my role here is probably wearing many hats is probably the easiest way to describe that.
I think that's a role that a lot of us on the call today can feel. And I know, one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about today is just really how do we make, the right decisions in the midst of, the word recession is such a strong word, but that's kind of where we're at today. But before we do that, would love to learn kind of your perception of revenue operations, right? So what is revenue operations to you, right? And how do you work with revenue operations as a sales leader?
I think it's, realistically, it's probably not a role that's really been around, that long historically when you're looking across the rest of the business. But I think it's very quickly becoming the role where people are turning much more of a, kind of open mind to. How I typically describe it, it's more around pulling the strings and finding out, not only from a sales point of view, but also, the other influencing factors across other departments. So how are those coming together? How can you maximize that right across the board? But ultimately, I think it's around getting all those different departments singing off the same hymn sheet. So, where can we get everybody moving in the same direction? Which ultimately, if everybody's pulling in that same direction, it further strengthens the business, helps the revenues and helps the business grow even further than where it's currently at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a sales leader, right? What are the key things that you really look for from your revenue operations counterparts, right? What makes your job easier, right? So when RevOps can do X, Y, and Z, or Z in your case for me, what makes that easier? What does that working relationship look like, and how do you measure that success?
Personally, from my point of view, mine is very much driven purely around data. So I'm a big advocate of that and actually trying to unify that across all those different departments. So how can we then start to, align and see the common trends? So in terms of what MQLs are coming in, what are our conversion rates from that aspect? How's that then leading into sales? And then ultimately, where a CS or even growth starting to have that impact in helping bring all that together. So it really is a kind of unification in terms of how are we reporting on all that data? How do we centralize all of it to ultimately give us a true picture in terms of actually what's happening across the business?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, one of the key topics here, right, is like what happens, right? So like we obviously were in the midst of recession, lots of uncertainty. We went from, a very high the last couple of years to a very, starting to be maybe not say low, but maybe one low, right? And how, as you think about your role in sales, and, I think a lot of people are feeling the do more with less, right? How does this change the way we make decisions? Like, what are the things that we need to start looking for? What are those data points that we need to evaluate? And like, what changes, right? And the big thing I think about, like, obviously we use data to make decisions, and we should be doing that every way. What changes from recession versus non-recession, right? How does that switch what we're doing?
Yeah, I think it's about clawing back and understanding where we at with the market last year, and actually looking at those conversion rates and things like that. So I think if you look, sales is probably the easiest one to quantify on that, but I take it very much from a data point of view. I think a lot of businesses look at it from, okay, this is our conversion rate, this is actually what we're achieving. Whereas, the individuals in the team are that they are actually all individuals, and not one unit all works in the same way. So I think it's about really, getting really, really granular with each individual to understand, okay, where were you last year, in terms of year on year, where were you in this quarter, in the previous year in 2022, and actually what did you achieve. Your demo rate at that point was this. We're now going up to demo to close ratio in terms of X now. So looking at that recession in order to obtain the same, it's then working in multiples of that. The market's obviously getting tighter. I think if somebody hasn't heard a DM say that they've had their budget clawed back over the last couple of months, I think is probably in a very unique position. So it's really about really digging very, very deep into the historical data you've got, but ultimately starting to work and utilize that data in terms of where that current stance is, and understanding then what do the metrics look now based on a year on year basis.
Yeah, and knowing that, your year on year is likely not going to show, you know, the same growth that it historically had. What are some of those decisions then, obviously, like, you have to start to make, right? I think most businesses are generally saying, like, how do we grow, right? But then what does it look like on how do we almost maintain?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's the beauty kind of sales, and it's probably we sell tech into the business, and it's probably this is where the pinch is feeling right across the tech sector as a whole. Everybody's been, over the last probably 2 years, which is why sales have been high. They've been bringing on new tools, they've been looking at ways of streamlining their processes and everything else in between. But actually now I think a lot more people are taking almost a step back to look at that tech stack and saying, okay, how can we almost consolidate some of these tools? How can we create that and make that even tighter? Obviously, clawing back on budget and probably releasing a bit more budget into their day to day. But ultimately, then it's allowing them to capitalize and, I say, create that single line of reporting, if that's probably the right word for it. So we're actually then able to, have less tools. We're able to consolidate perhaps multiple different things into one. But ultimately, what it's then doing is all around centralizing that data into ultimately a CRM, which is, the should be the source of truth, but probably quite often isn't. And I think once you've really got that information really tight, everything's working in unison, that's where you can then start to move things forward. And I think that's typically what is being seen across the market at the moment, is people kind of taking those steps to almost take a step back, start to reevaluate, and then start to put that strategy in place for throughout 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a RevOps leader, as we, it's do more with less, right? And like, the things that we constantly look at, especially as we look at buying technology, is what's the platform kind of approach that you're taking. Historically, it's been a lot of point solutions coming together, and you're purchasing these point solutions. You're figuring out a way to make them work together. They all have their individual use cases. How do you look through kind of the oh, sorry that there's an echo from my mic too. Hopefully, let me know if that doesn't resolve. I'll try to stay still too. But how do you think through, what are you trying to solve, right? And when you're doing tool evaluation, being really mindful not only of, the current state and the future state, but what do you need today versus what do you need tomorrow, but also the cost to migrate, right? This is something that you talk a lot about. If I'm buying a solution that feels good for where we are today, right? What if we increase our headcount by 50 people? Will it meet that need? If the answer is no, or if we change revenue or we add more products, right? What's that cost to migrate? And is it worth that upfront investment is another thing spend a lot of time on. And then the additional piece that we continue to evaluate is, licensing. Are our users using the tools the right way? There's obviously a cost for every tool. How do we make sure they're using it right? Where does enablement come into play? How do we make sure, the managers, the data, we're seeing the value of this? If we have a call recording software that we're spending $1,000 a year per user on, and the user records 3 calls a week, is that a good enough ROI? What's that right amount there too? And really drilling into that. Would love to get kind of your perspective as you work from a sales perspective on like what should consumers be looking at to help quantify the value of the technology.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are a couple of points in there really really to address. And I think the biggest one on that really is, tackle one problem at a time. Don't go at it and think, okay, right, there's a huge issue, we need to rip it all apart and start again. Actually go at it piece by piece. That way you can then start to, figure out and find out the other holes as well, because once you start to fix one hole, something else will become a bit more clear, and you'll start to shift through that session. And I think that's a major part that often people look at and probably underestimate, because as you said, the cost of migration, the cost of even implementation, especially where you're taking time out of devs and everything else in between, it does get expensive. And it's about monitoring that all the way through.
And the cost to manage, right? I have yet to find a tool that I can just set and truly forget, right? There's anytime you're buying technology, like there has to be a human operator to it. The other thing that I think us consumers, we tend to not think about in this is like, how does the technology support our process, right? So when you are buying technology, when you're looking to solve the problem, like using your process as your driver, right? And then using technology as your enabler of that, right? So your technology should work for your process, for your business, not the other way around. And that's where I start to see companies really get burned when they make these decisions. Is they're, we still talk shiny object syndrome, and I don't think that's going to ever go away. But like, you've got to really make sure the tech's working for you.
100%. And I think a major one, which probably every tech business is probably guilty of a little bit, is, customers are coming up to renewal, and ultimately it's like, oh, we've got a new shiny tool, we've got a new shiny feature, we're going to start to celebrate, are you utilizing that, and actually utilize that from a retention point of view. Well, actually, in terms of the products you got, and that you have in your tech stack, most of them have account managers attached to them. Most of them have everything else. So quite often something that we really see and we really try to focus on is actually having good engagement with that account manager, rather than them waiting or coming up to renewal and it's like, oh, we've got this new shiny feature, by the way. Is that something you want to, is that going to keep you on the platform? Why aren't we approaching these problems earlier? And actually then, these new features or new releases within those products, perhaps that's solving some of our issues and certainly saving us time before we're even starting to go out and look for other solutions, look at other things that could solve our problems. And I think that's a massive part of a service that is probably quite underserved, in terms of what's offered.
Yeah, and from a customer experience, and I think like take this as twofold, right? Like look at your business and say like, is our CS team actually engaging with customers before the point of renewal, right?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that, and it's how many times are they engaging with customers before the point of renewal, right? One time's not good enough, right? Depending your platform, or what are the customer touch points? Let's talk through that, because you might have lower level touch points that come from automation and those components. But as long as they're providing value, I think that that's fine. But there has to be some level of interaction in those pieces. And then from a consumer standpoint, right, if I have a software that I'm spending a good amount of money on every year, and I'm not meeting with the CSM quarterly at a minimum, that's a problem, right? And you as consumers are probably not getting what you need out of the tool. Or you might think you are, but you're probably not actually exhausting what you can leverage there. As valuable customers, you should feel empowered to lean on the CS team, lean on the organization to not only understand their roadmap, but also make sure you're utilizing it right. One of the questions that I always ask when I meet with vendors is like, how should we be using this differently? What are you seeing other customers doing? How are they hitting, what are they seeing that we're not doing? And it might not apply to our business case per se, but it is going to help us spin the wheels and say, oh yeah, we haven't thought about doing these things. Like maybe we should implement them. Like don't get like lost in what you're doing, right?
100.
And you use your resources. I mean, you might think you're only paying for the SaaS subscription, but you're paying for the support, you're paying for the service, you're paying for that account management. So leverage it.
100%. It's always the thing that's always forgotten is that additional cost you'll pay and the additional support that is on offer. Utilizing it in every single way that you can. Is it, there, as you said, pick other people's brains. How are their other customers utilizing it? What perhaps other workarounds are people finding within the platform where they having success? And ultimately, more brains the better, right? You're going to get more ideas and flood more out of it. And yeah, I completely agree. It's a hugely underserved part of what you're paying for and what the services that you're getting.
Now, my caveat to this is don't be a jerk and email your CSM every time
No.
you have a support ticket, right? Like make sure you follow the process and use it the right way. I mean, I definitely apologize to anyone. Sometimes I have done that in the past, but like use it the right way, build that right relationship. It will make the point of renewal. It will make the point of those conversations so much better in the long run for both parties as you get aligned and do that. So as we think about, the tech, the do more with less, thinking through, not only we're trying to reduce our resources, reduce our spend, but also improve growth, business value, right? When we think specifically about the sales process, what are some of the things that you guys are looking at or seeing in terms of like, how do we better streamline, operationalize? The word of the year has been productivity and like just bolster productivity across the sales organization. So curious on some of the strategies and tactics you guys have applied.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, in terms of, the buying process at the moment, it's certainly extended. It's got more complicated. There's more stakeholders that are being brought into the fold. Ultimately at the moment, that probably the biggest barrier amongst any deal process at the moment is within finance. So the earlier we can start to bring those individuals into that process, so that you've got the CFO's ear, they understand exactly what the cost is, they can start to see the value. Once you've got them bought in terms of, okay, they understand the cost, it's then around, who else can you bring into that organization? So other CROs, are you bringing in even likes of AEs and SDRs if you're selling into that sector? Like, how can we start to utilize those to then influence the CFO, because ultimately that's where that's going, but it's all going to lead back to that final marker. But it's around then building those relationships and leverage, and essentially building almost like an emotional relationship with the CFO. So that once they then start having that leverage and everything else bought into it, it's then, it's an easy transition through, rather than it being a blocker or a last minute battle, as I'm sure many people are experiencing end of quarter.
Yeah, and as you're working with, the CFO, and I think that's great advice, from what you're seeing like Revops, right? What are the key kind of things that you're looking at in those proposals, right? How do you help build that business case with, with the operations specialists for it to make sense from a financial perspective? What are some of, the levers or the dials you guys are really trying to quantify?
So we found moving in terms of, and again, through tracking lots of different data in terms of, outbound activity, in terms of response rates, and that's right across, email campaigns, that's across the likes of LinkedIn, that's from outbound cold calling and so forth. And what we've really done is dig very, very deeply into the data in terms of, the best response times in terms of across all those different channels. And we're starting to really break up the consultants like day to day. So all of the AEs now are working very, very structured, which is very different in the US to how we're operating in the UK. But it's starting to fit in terms of where the best responses are within that. So we're getting like kind of that granular in terms of how they're working and where, because before we were very, very heavy on a cold outbound perspective in terms of cold calling. That was where majority of our success came from. But over probably the past 5 to 6 months, that's shifted dramatically. So through tracking that, we were able to pick out and pinpoint those movements very, very quickly. So that's where we've been able to shift and shape that, the day to day.
No, that's great. And I think, that's, as budgets get cut, and I laugh because I've been spending a lot of time just today on like procurement pieces, is, really how you measure that value, how you manage that value, and how, I spend a lot of time, my best piece of advice for anyone who starts a company, or starts working at a company who doesn't have their tech stack documented, go to finance and say, tell me how much we pay per month. Like, what are we getting invoiced, right? Like, show me the contracts, and let's make sure we get it documented. Because one of the things that I think we don't do a good job at is really managing the ongoing spend across our stack, especially license-based pieces, right? If you're not negotiating growth within your contract, if you're not, really looking at usage and those components, like, you're likely paying for things you don't need. And so really staying on top of that. The other piece is, like, if you don't have your contract centralized and really, as simple as a Google sheet, you're likely going to hit auto renewals and not even realize you renewed on something that no one is using because Bob Smith put it on a credit card 3 years ago and it's just continued to renew, and that's where it's at. So again, I think tech stack management, especially at this point, is such a strong point of what we need to do better as ops professionals. And then on the secondary piece, and what Nick has really talked to, is like, how do we use the data, right? Not only from the stack, but the data that we're producing from our process, to pull those right levers, to make sure we're setting, one of the things that I think you talked really well about is like setting the right expectations for growth, right? Especially with where we're at. And, what are some of like your strategies in having those, what I'd consider almost crucial conversations, or, they're not the fun conversations, right? Not only like with leadership, right, on what's feasible, but then also downstream to the seller organization.
I think you hit the nail on the head. They're not the fun conversations to have, and they're probably certainly not in terms of where expectations were from 6, 7 months ago, realistically. But within that space, it's around having those, but becoming much more unified from a senior management point of view. And actually, what you're then starting to do when that starts to be channeled, downstream to people at desk, people at the day to day, is taking them on that journey. Many people probably at that level, they haven't been through recession, they haven't been through tough periods. So what does it mean now? But actually, what's the light at the end of the tunnel? And actually, once you've aligned everything at the top in terms of what that looks like from a forecasting perspective, I think the major topic at the moment is people understanding that Q2 is probably going to lift up slightly, but everybody really aiming towards probably the end of Q3, Q4 for a heavy end for the year. So how do you then take those people at desk on that journey to ultimately get their buy-in, ultimately minimize your staff turnover as well, but just retain that experience that you have got within your team, so that when the market does really turn and builds, that actually you're going to be off to a running start.
And when you think about, one of the common themes here too is, right, is maintenance and expansion and what you already have, right? We all, there's a factor, and we all should probably know it, but it's cheaper to retain than it is to acquire. So what are some of the pieces that you think about as you look at, changing potentially from an acquisition into more of a retention and expansion play, and some of the data points that you're looking at there?
So as much, in terms of, like, I suppose from any department really, but again, sales is pretty quantifiable. But that kind of speed to first deal, like, how can we get people up and running? What are we expecting? What do those expectations look like? And much like ourselves, we're still growing within that space, we're still adding individuals in, but it's then actually, how do we change those expectations to fit with the current market? You don't want somebody coming in expecting exactly the same lift off as somebody compared to a year ago. So what can we do to then understand how current AEs are, and then reverse engineering that in order to fit the new model so that expectations can still be aligned, people can still feel motivated and actually that they're achieving. But ultimately, where you're adding people in around this period now, they're starting to gain that experience, let's be honest, within a much harder market, much harder conversations that they're having. So again, as you start to transition out of that, things really will pick up and move forward pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think, as at the end of the day, right, the customer experience and like that is so critical for businesses to focus on. Obviously acquisition becomes important, but keeping what you have and making sure you have that right pivot, that right attention, and getting that focus where it needs to be. We had a question from the audience regarding the best strategy to present when moving off of a tool in your tech stack, especially when one other team is attached to it but it's not crucial. Would love to get kind of your perspective on that, and then I'm happy to share mine too.
I've probably just been going through exactly the same thing, if I'm honest. Ultimately, the decision lies in terms of what's best for the business. It's again, it is difficult because not every single person within a business is going to work in the same way. So you're always going to have one person that's stickier to it than others. But ultimately, what's going to bring the best efficiency for the business as a whole, and ultimately, as you mentioned, what's going to bring you the best ROI on that? Is it actually investing within another tool that perhaps even creates surplus budget, which actually means you can reinvest that into something else, perhaps reinvest it even into your marketing spend and so forth like that. But ultimately, it's got to be something that everybody's aligned on. But again, it's probably taking, if there is that individual that's very reliant on that one tool, it's about bringing them on that journey, getting them to understand, and ultimately the new tool or replacement, how's that going to enhance perhaps their day to day as well, beyond what they're currently experiencing or how they're stuck in their ways.
Yeah, as much as possible, make them think it was their idea.
Yeah.
That's maybe that's maybe bad advice, but generally works out pretty well. The other thing I think is like data becomes key in that, right? So when you look at this, is like as much as possible, try to make it black and white. Here's what we spend, here's what we get from this. Here's either where the duplication is, where that is. Spend the time to really evaluate, analyze, and drive and like make it very clear, especially if it is an overhead cost, the utilization's not there, it's not driving the value that's necessary. I think is really what drives it. I mean, the best way to say it is remove emotion from the decisions. Like as much as like technology purchases shouldn't be emotional, they any type of purchase generally starts to become emotional to some level, especially if it's where you spend your day to day, you're using it for key things like, but really try to make it a clear cut piece. The other side of this is like bring voices to the table, make sure people feel heard. I think that tends to also be, it might be less sensitivity to actually removing the tool and more sensitivity to not feeling like they were a part of the process. And so I think that also becomes just really something to be mindful of when making these decisions. One of the best pieces of advice regarding tech that I have ever gotten is like, don't buy a tool because of a person, right? I think that's such a huge thing. I've worked with several companies over my time and they're, oh, we need Marketo because this is what I used at my last company or what I'm familiar with, right? Like people don't stay forever. And the second you make those decisions based on people and the person leaves, you're in, you're stuck, right? Make the decision based on what the business needs versus like the person who operates. Obviously, there's value in having somebody who has the experience, right? But ideally, when you're hiring and you're bringing people in, you should be bringing people in who can learn the tools, learn the stack. I joke and talk a lot with my team and people I've hired is like, you really don't want a tool in your title, right? You don't want to be Molly, the Salesforce admin, right? You want to be able to grow your career in the right way and be agnostic and know how to solve a problem with technology, but not be constructed by the technology as well. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. I just talked for a long time there.
No, I thought the really interesting point within that, and I think it really is something that not enough people do, is just be open and transparent in terms of what stuff costs, because it's very much hidden always behind the scenes with businesses, and I think a lot of people really don't understand. So actually, when you start to have these conversations as perhaps that one individual that wants that tool, and suddenly you start telling them that it's costing you 30, 40, $50,000, they'll suddenly start to realize why the decisions are being made, and why that transition is going to happen. As you said, the more black and white that is, and ultimately, if they can, even once you've implemented the new tool, they can start to see the results themselves, and you can start to compare that in terms of their performance previously, then suddenly that starts to really sink true, and start to understand, and probably more so trust you even further in terms
Yeah.
of the decisions and why you're making them.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I did earlier this year, and I hadn't done at other companies before, but what I did was I actually did a breakout by role of how much the company, it's not how much the company pays, right? But like you think about, how much does the company provide in health insurance? How much does the company, those types of pieces? But how much does an actual like tech stack cost per SDR, per AE, per AM? And really started to lay that out. So we understood, what that investment was, what the categorizations of investment were, and what the expectations were for usage, to really ensure that we were putting the right efforts into the right platforms, into the right, essentially processes to get that. But when you start putting that on paper, it's, you could be spending an extra $10,000 to $15,000 per SDR on technology to help equip them to do their job, right? Like, and I think that puts things into a really strong perspective as you look at, not only stack inflation but stack value. So if you haven't done that, for the people on the call, it's kind of an interesting exercise.
It's probably even more so to keep track of, because as you said, people quite often, you've got 60-day renewal terms and you've got everything else, but what you'll also have in that each and every year, those prices are going up. They're going up 5%, 10% each year. So these are really getting into that and understanding how that's transitioning year on year as well is going to be absolutely key to maintain that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul asked a good two-sided question, so appreciate that, Paul. So Nick, we'll go with you first. From a sales leader perspective, what expectations do you have, and how do you work with Revops to plan strategy for future quarters and years?
Good question. So
especially in the context of a potential market downturns, let's add the like kicker in there.
yeah, it's a difficult one, because ultimately, it depends obviously when your budgets were set and expectations. But a lot of people, I think, if we're being frank, didn't probably expect things to be where they were probably as quickly as they have been over the last few months. So I think this is where working very, very closely with people, having good stakeholder management internally is absolutely vital, because bringing them into the data that's being tracked across different departments is key, because that's going to help you tell that story moving forward. So is actually the performance increasing in terms of the uplift in terms of volumes that people are doing from an output perspective? Is that performance increasing, but the deals are taking longer? So you can then start to bring them on that journey in terms of that transition. And as I mentioned earlier, I think many people at the moment have probably had a much quieter Q1. We're expecting a bit more of a lift up in Q2, but probably still below expectations where they were probably 4 or 5 months ago. But then planning for that strong Q3. So how are you also then backing that up with your hiring strategy? Are you starting to build people into that picture now? So again, as that market starts to shift, you've got experienced individuals within there that can start to really lift and ultimately claw back perhaps some of the losses that have been made in H1.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the flip side of that, from my perspective as a revenue ops leader, what are the expectations I have of sales leaders during this process? And right, I think, some of the soft pieces that I care about, right, is like the alignment. I think the alignment is so critical, not only with the sales leaders, but also the marketing leaders, is to come together and make sure, we have those KPIs we're looking at. We understand why we're looking at what we're looking at and what we're trying to turn. When you talked a lot about like average deal cycle, right? What are our expectations of how much longer this is going to take, right? We expect that our velocity is going to ultimately increase. We're not going to close this fast. How do we then work together and build the right strategy with marketing and make sure we have those additional touch points at the right time to help bring this together and setting those expectations around the strategy, around the goals, and make sure we're talking the same language. Again, I think sounds so simple, right? But alignment is really hard. And alignment when there's not authority is even harder. And in most organizations, there's not authority across this, right? So when you think about this, it's like you've got your marketing, you got your CS, you got your sales, you got your RevOps. Like, while they might all report to the CRO potentially, there's not still that authority, right? And so you have to really make an effort on that alignment. And it has to be a cognizant effort, and it has to be something that you can then continue to quantify back to and understand, what are our expectations, what are our goals. And the concerns that I start to see is people start speaking a different language, right? They're looking at these different measures that then don't actually come together. And it's okay to have your secondary metrics, but like, you've got to have this group on your top level of like, this is what we need to be doing, and this is what we expect results to be. Here's what we're holding ourselves accountable for. And we're going to meet every week, every other week, and track the progress to it.
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. That alignment is so hard. Everybody's got different ideas. Everybody's shifting day to day. They're seeing different things, hearing different things throughout each week. So something I know, we very conscious of and doing here is actually bringing together those strategy meetings much more closer together. So actually, rather than every quarter to kind of review and every 6 months in terms of planning, we've brought those almost monthly at the moment, just to ensure that everybody is still singing on that same hymn sheet. Are we still keeping close? And that's actually starting to really create a much more tight knit, community where we're having frequent conversations, and ultimately we can be reactive very quickly on those as well.
Right, because you have to anticipate, right? Even within the it's at any point, but even more so with, uncertainty in the market, like, there will be pivots, right? Things will change. You will be testing, you will be, seeing what works and what helps to move the needle, and like, staying aligned in that is so crucial. Especially as you think about, the people who actually have to deliver on those initiatives. If you're like, oh yeah, we're going to test this pricing, busting. Sorry, I'm going to rag on salespeople. Apologies, Nick. Comes together and is like, hey, we're going to completely revamp these spiffs for this quarter. And they tell you like 2 days before it has to happen, right? It's like, oh, but we can't actually measure or track that because we're not set up to do that today. So that's where that communication, that alignment, that foresight, well, it might not be, you might not have as much of a runway because it might be, the quick idea that we need to test and we need to swag through it. But still, again, keeping that dialogue in place. And like, again, I laugh because I'm like, I feel like a parent. I'm like, use your resources. But like, as coworkers, we should be using each other as resources and starting to, group think on ideas and get that different perspective as well. Like, I much prefer to, especially when planning and those pieces, is like asking my team, like, what do you see? Right? What do you think we should be doing that we're not doing? Like, if you're not asking those downstream questions to your team, like, even especially your salespeople, right? Like, what are we missing? Yeah.
Who are speaking to your customers? Who's understanding the market more and more every minute of every single day? Utilize them and feed it back into the system, into the cycle.
Yeah, and especially like at the times where, it is a lot harder generally, right? Been a lot harder. There's a lot of uncertainty. Like, what could I do to make your life easier? Right? Those are questions that I think about from, an ops perspective, even if it's as simple as, geez, Molly, like, we ask way too many questions when we try to close an opportunity in Salesforce, right? Like, this isn't super valuable. Like, how do we make this help improve my efficiency, improve my productivity? Like, those are little things, but like, it's still valuable feedback, right? And you should try to make sure your teams feel heard, you're taking things into consideration. Doesn't mean you're going to do everything, but at least start to understand, like, what are some of like the small things that can contribute that will have at least a meaningful impact. Might not totally go back to, a monetary impact, but there could still be, a soft satisfaction impact too, which I think is still important.
100%. And even as you said, those little things that perhaps, you can add in that don't take any time really for somebody sat at desk. Actually start to think actually which are going to be the most impactful, where you can start to get really targeted, 60, 90, 120 days later, where actually then that's going to start to bring in more of those MQLs back through perhaps some just one piece of additional data that you've enforced on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, reminder to audience, like please shoot in questions here as well. I mean, obviously, I think anyone who's joined these know that I'm perfectly fine to keep talking, but want to make sure you guys are heard as you talk about what we expect to see around the Q3 timeframe. Like, how do you help to kind of prepare your team for that, right? What are some of the things that you're not only doing today to help prepare them, but what are the changes that you feel like you've made internally that you'll keep, right, recently too, that have been like actual positive changes that you would apply without the downturn you wish you did sooner?
I'm trying to think. So certainly, like in terms of the daily structure and actually breaking that up, that's something that's going to be way more reactive in terms of how the market goes, and whether that changes, whether there's shifts within that pattern. So that's going to be that side of it. In terms of actually probably something we will keep, is actually to keep that team really tight knit and bring them much closer together. We've done a lot more kind of socializing together. I'm not talking general things, let's all go out for a drink and do something on Friday. A lot more stuff within the week.
Still important things to do though.
Yeah, 100. Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do love a beer, but from that point of view, even stuff within the week. So whether that's going out for a walk together, at lunch, whatever that may be, it's just around how tight can we keep everybody together, and again throughout all the different departments. So we're trying to do a lot more of that. So actually, there becomes much more of a unison that actually through the tougher times, those people feeling like they're much closer together. But as we start to transition out, I firmly believe, I think, they'll be working as a much tighter knit group as a result of that, and ultimately just making that much stronger, as in when that market does turn.
No, that's great. And how do you feel, with the team? I'm not sure if you guys are fully remote, or obviously you're not fully remote because you're sitting in an office. But how have you how have you worked with some of like your remote employees and helped kind of bring some of that camaraderie virtually?
It's there are obviously challenging times. Probably the biggest challenge for us, is across the pond. We've got people in the US, we've got people in the UK. That's always the biggest challenge. So what we're starting to do there is a lot more kind of like group kickoffs, but a lot more of like sharing ideas. So we're having numerous sessions right throughout the week, through SDRs departments, through AEs, and everybody in between, to start to understand what are they hearing from cross borders. Are there different
Yep.
shifts, and certainly a pattern quite often, in terms of that fight, the kind of economy and things like that. In terms of a recession, it's often something you will start to see shift, and it will affect one area first before the rest. So is there information actually we're starting to share there that then they can start to see that trend shifting across? There have been elements of that, but hopefully, I say that's something we're going to continue. But hopefully we'll start to see some more results from that as well. So it's just about bringing people a lot more closer together, more open conversations, and seeing what they can do. I don't know what you've done from your side.
Yeah, no, I think that that's great. And Deal is, if you're familiar, we're 100% remote. Everyone is remote and everyone is everywhere. I joke. My joke is, it's not a joke because it's not a really good joke, but I have team members on every continent other than Antarctica right now. So I mean, one day maybe Antarctica, but you've got to make again the cognizant effort to foster those relationships and gather that feedback. And it is hard, right? Because human instinct is trust and relational building versus just spilling your guts to somebody you don't know, who's your coworker, right? But like opening up, and as leaders, we need to create those safe spaces for that dialogue and build that foundation for that communication and capturing that information. And as leaders, the best thing we can do is make sure we apply what we learn, right? And whether it's application or acknowledgement, both are equally as important, right? And no one wants to be asked to do something that doesn't get acknowledged, right? Because then you're just wasting effort. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do a good job of, and like doing it in a way that you know not always as a group too. And that's, I think, something that we've not created always those great spaces during this virtual or this global workforce where, you're having more of those meaningful one-on-ones and you feel like you have the time and attention before you've got to jump to that next Zoom. Which you get, like, and I think the thing that you talked about, and this is one of the things I miss so much about working in the office, is going on a walk, right? That was one of my favorite things to go and do with team members, because it was like, let's humanize, let's get out of this conference room and sit and have the conversation. We got a couple other questions here too from Charlie. How are you thinking about aligning marketing and CS to existing customers to retain them and increase usage and ultimately upsell them?
Good one. A lot of this, in terms of what we're doing with this, is starting to share, as well as like all the data behind the usage behind the product and everything else from that perspective. This probably goes back into what you were saying earlier, Molly, is, what are our other customers doing? Where are they starting to see success? How are they doing that? And it's about relaying that information straight across. But more importantly as well, what we've really started to do is to starting to get our CS and our marketing to actually sit in on sales calls as well, so they can start to understand, how is that market shifting? What are the salespeople hearing within the market? How are they reacting to that? And ultimately, once we start to get those aligned, what we have seen is, marketing being able to become much more apparent in terms of the current market rather than being pretty standardized with things. But more importantly, CS is constantly just, really getting educated in terms of what, sales are hearing across like big objections and so forth. So it's really helping them prepare for around that renewal phase. So that's something where we have seen some real success very quickly, if I'm honest as well.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of this, right, is like bringing the sales team into the CS fold as well, and understanding, hey, these are the clients we were able to get moving very successfully, right? Like, these were the pain points that they had, and here are the things that we applied, that if we started having these conversations, in the sales cycle, might have helped it move quicker or showed that value add. Or to to your second point, Charlie, is like, is it better to double down on your ICP or expand it? And I think that goes down to, like, if you expand your ICP, do you provide the same amount of value, right? Like, at the end of the day, you can't be something to everyone versus being, the right thing to someone. And so it comes down to, if you expand, and and it might be a good time to test, right? Like, do we get penetration if we switch and add additional industries, right? And what does that look like, and how much adjustment has to happen to our product, right? Everything is a trade-off. If I decide that I currently sell to teachers, and tomorrow I'm going to sell to police officers. Sorry, really bad example, but what has to change in my product, right? What adjustments make there, and am I going to go off of my, like, bread and butter to support that? And, like, have I proven that? So I do think there's a level of, testing that has to happen. And Nick, would love your perspective and understanding, like, how is this a tactic you guys have tried too, and what you look at from an ICP standpoint?
100%. It is something we've done previously, and we've done it as well pretty recently as well. But I would probably firmly advise the testing part that you mentioned. There's definitely, there's an element where you've got to break out of your comfort zone. It depends how big, your tangible market is, really, in terms of, is there room to double down on your ICP? What's competition like? How have you been performing against competition? Start to take all of that into consideration. But ultimately, there may be areas out there that you've been thinking about, we haven't really tested, where actually it might have a really good fit, provide some really good value for those customers. But I would certainly A/B test that within small buckets, because you can get lost. You can get lost down a rabbit hole, and ultimately, your resource, your time spent, and cost
Yeah.
of that can be, seriously affected with it as well.
Yeah, just the investment piece. And I love, we always, this sounds like a bad example, and I might take us back 5 years on this, but we think marketing, sales, CS, right? How do you move marketing down below and move marketing just so it's not sitting on this top of funnel kind of component of this, and getting, that tied in to the expansion, to, again, to Ben's point, what's happening on the sales calls, what are we hearing, how can we apply that messaging, how can we, make sure we're thinking of the right use cases that we're using to capture too. And you again use your resources, group think, work as a team, not in silos, all things we are so aware of and we talk about, but like stepping back and saying, are we actually practicing what we're preaching, outside of just the PowerPoint that we put together for our QBR at our exec level, right?
Exactly that. I think I was going to say something and I'll completely
Yeah.
forgotten. So yeah, carry on.
Yeah. And Charlie, back to tech stack, what's another mission critical tool other than, the CRM from your perspective, right? What could you not do your job without? Or what could your team not do their job without?
I could be quite biased here because our team do use our tool, but one that I would certainly double down on, if you're looking at it, the market is tight. The market is, it's getting harder and harder to find the right people to reach out to at the right time. So have a look and look at tools that can aid you with that, with a additional lead generation process. I'm not saying you put your whole team into it and it's like, right, that's all you're using, go, that's it. You need a blend of the two. But anything that can assist you in that, certainly within this market, that's really going to help you. So that's something I'd look at.
Yeah, definitely. I think, go ahead, finish
No, I
your
was going
thought.
to say, no, the other point that we've really looked at doing is, investing in tools that again align across all those different departments. So how can we join up, marketing with inbounds and MQLs, with sales, with CS, and actually even within our product as well. So again, it's just about aligning with that, but those are definitely what I'd look at.
Yeah, and I think I like the point that you made that I think really resonates is like the diversification, right, of the process. I think, it's hard because we want to keep people in a standard workflow, right? And like try to be very consistent and precise, but we also don't want to be, myopic to what we're missing in that. So understanding like how to augment, how to be more creative, like how to not just say this is how I source, but I might be missing the rest of the world over here. And then the other piece of this is like, if you haven't done a time study with your, SDR team, with your prospecting team, like sit and do a time study. Understand how much time does it take for them to find a qualified lead? Then reverse engineer how much does that actually cost? How much time does it take when, and like understand where they're spending their time. And you should do it not just with your SDRs. You should do it with honestly like every role that you have, to start finding those weak points in the process. And that's where, when we think about the people, process, data, technology, you start to figure out, if I could reduce prospecting for an SDR by 25%, right? Let's say they spend 2 hours a day doing prospecting. If I could cut that down to 30 minutes, what do they use that additional hour and a half on, right? Generally they use it on better messaging, right? Better delivery, better, components that should improve conversion rate. So doing, I think any tool, and like before you look at the tool, right, understand the business problem that you're trying to solve as it relates to the process, but start to then again going back an hour now, back to the ROI conversation, right? Like that's how you start to build the ROI and build the case, right? And a lot of companies are less, they're not hiring as much, right? Like, what does this help to supplement? Likely less of the cost of an SDR potentially from a headcount perspective, but can help to supplement, what the activity is or the time commitment of 5 SDRs. So make sure you're doing, I'm going to say do the math, but make sure you're doing the math and understanding what you can do there. And then the other tool that I think you talked about this well too, is like, it comes back to the data, right? Like, and I don't know that that's necessarily always has to be this tool. I'm not saying you need to go out and like buy, this fancy BI tool, right? But have a way to speak the same language and have the consistency across your KPIs, across your metrics. And it doesn't have to be a tool. Tools can help in that. But you've got to have the strategy, you've got to have the mindset, and you've got to have the alignment to really bring that together. But have a framework for how you're going to look at the business and measure your business. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. What else do you want to talk about, Nick? I think I'll leave you 5 minutes. That's very gracious of me.
That's okay.
As you're sitting in the dark, and we're
I think I know we've touched on a hell of a lot there, really. But if there's anything I think that anybody can take to this, it is the alignment piece. If you've constantly got the battles with other stakeholders, that perhaps got other ideas and things like this, it just makes your life so miserable. It's so hard, and ultimately nobody's ever going to get anywhere. You've got to pull in the right direction, certainly within hard periods and tougher times. So the closer you can start to bring people to that, bring people in your ideas, and ultimately, if you've got ideas, share them as well. I think that's something that's often forgotten. Start to get feedback on the other key stakeholders within the organization. How is it going to affect other departments and that new idea that you have? But start to share it, start to feel it out before you think about implementing it. You think about talking about it to the wider business, to the wider staff. Start to really understand the pain points of that from each department, and actually if they got different ideas that can counteract, or what can they change to help perhaps fit in that good idea if it is one. But the tighter you can get as an organization, as a business, then ultimately I think you're going to come out on top in terms of the tougher periods, and build up for that stronger finish to the year. That would probably be my biggest point.
No, I love that. And I think, to just add the other pieces like transparency, right? Transparency during uncertainty, I think goes such a long way, right? Anytime there's uncertainty, there's always some level of panic, of, a concern generally, but the more you can be transparent, be honest, be fair, right? To your team, to your employees, like, the better, right? And generally it goes, if you're like, oh yeah, we're increasing your quota, right? Why? How? What led you to this decision, and be able to explain that is a lot better than just because.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's not just the key stakeholders that you're trying to do this to. Business isn't always sunshine and rainbows. There are tougher periods, and the transparency you can have with your team around that, the more they're going to trust you. That's the bottom line. And again, with that trust, you've got more chance than anybody else in order to retain that team, again further upskill them, make that business unit even stronger, so that again, as you continue to move forward, and hopefully times will get easier, then you've probably got a very, very good foundation in terms of a team that is going to stick with you for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. So perfect. Well, thank you so much, Nick. Anyone else in the audience have any questions? I won't hold people if we don't have other topics, but really appreciate the time today. And I think great insights. This is, I think we'd all appreciate having the conversation of what do you do when you're in hyper growth and everything is going awesome. But I think having this conversation is super important and super good to be aware of and working forward.
Likewise. I know, great to have a conversation. I say, if anybody's got any questions or want to pick my brain, then please reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so.
All right. I think it's time to get this started. So, hello, everyone. I'm going to be your moderator today. My name is Aaron Rosenthal. This session is, the topic of this session is Better Together in 2023, Data and Revops. I am joined by Molly Bodensteiner, who leads Global Revenue Operations at Deal.
them is going to use to edit and then deliver to a customer off of data that resides in Marketo for someone who hasn't touched Marketo or been active in the marketing frame for more than 18 months, because that data is obviously going to have staled out and you may be referring to the wrong experience or anything. So understanding the data landscape and the governance framework of where accuracy resides within the life cycle of data is going to become hypercritical when we start plugging in machine learning into the whole content curation process.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the data, yeah, to your point, the data lifecycle, right, is huge. And understanding that and being able to, and this is where I think CRMs fail us quite a bit, is, the recency and the relevance of the data.
Right.
There is not a good way to understand that within CRM.
Absolutely.
Well, there's recency, there's relevance. There's also how comprehensive is the data, right? Because
right.
I've one of the things that we see all the time at Synchrony, and one of the big reason why companies work with us is you may have data across systems, but the question is, which system is the master? Which system is going to, is that definitive truth on, this is the customer. These are the interactions that they have. If you're a retail business, you have interactions that, may happen in a store, may happen online, may happen in your mobile app. And a lot of times, companies are still trying to check that, check things off the list. Yes, we've got our product data, or yes, we've got our app data, or yes, we've got, our website engagement data. For you, Paul, because you're on the marketing side, I'm sure a lot of what you're trying to do with data, part of it is both awareness around insights, how things are performing, where are opportunities to make improvements, but also machine learning for marketing is huge because it can add that next activation layer, right, for your customers. But having that holistic, awareness of everywhere that customers may engage with you is essential to making sure that anything that you're going to be training a, ML model on to, for example, like you said, write a script. You don't want to have those blind spots. So how confident are you, Paul, that, or how are you tackling what may be already or still blind spots, and how you're weaving those into what you're trying to create, which I would imagine is this cohesive story around everything that a customer does and how they interact with your company?
Yeah, I mean, I think a subtitle for this portion of the conversation is going to be everything everywhere all at once. I mean, if you really have to, if we want to peel the onion of machine learning and data, particularly in the marketing world, I work at OneTrust. So the idea of consent and preference management extends to the notion that we need to be geographically sensitive to any norms or legislation related to how data is handled. And with the proliferation of machine learning, the next capability that we are designing into our marketing data infrastructure is consenting data use for machine learning, because there are jurisdictions that will very quickly establish legislative requirements that say, even as fundamental as scoring, you need consent to score someone's behavior. And the capability to manage where the consent is to leverage data for machine learning is going to become a significant component or element of the way that the data infrastructure needs to be established. So data discovery as a discipline is something very foreign at the moment in the marketing and sales universe, but the moment that consent relates to what machine learning activities can be processed on an individual's data, the notion of data discovery to understand what systems store what relevant PII related to an individual, so that if an individual says they do not want any of their data involved in any machine learning algorithms that are being used, we need to be able to silence and control the proliferation of that data in the ecosystem, because we aren't consented to store or process that individual's data. So It's
And
a
ideally,
Pandora's box. And that's where I'm saying that I don't know how far you want to go into this conversation because it's probably 4 webinars worth. But the idea of what data we have, the way it's being leveraged, and what systems and tools are proliferating that data internally becomes extremely significant when we talk about consented data.
I'd imagine you want, and maybe you already have, that one place where you can manage that consent, even though it's potentially half a dozen different systems that are either creating or sharing that data.
And there's one system that I could recommend, and it's OneDress. But this is not a commercial, so.
It helps that you have that, though. I mean,
that's right.
And how about you, Molly? When it comes to making sure that I know that you're being on the Revops side, you're, I'm sure, heavily focused on insights from the data. I'm sure automations are certainly part of that. But when it comes to ensuring that, when you're making business decisions off of data that you're collecting across many different systems, how confident are you, and what do you do to make sure that that data is as holistic as it can be?
Yeah, and I think, generally I think about it as kind of 2 different sets of data. Like there's the just-in-time components, which is the one-to-one, right? So when I think about what am I surfacing up to a sales rep, to a CSM, to an SDR, to marketing for next best action. So how am I taking and understanding the experience and then driving what should that next touch be based on the individualized data that I have at an account, contact, lead component, and making sure, I think about this from the experience is like, should I send that email promoting this product if they have a tier 1 support ticket open? Probably not, right? Very, very simple usage of behavioral data and situational data. And then we look at what I consider the aggregation data. And that's what's pulling into like the BI tool, understanding trends, the combination of data to say, where do we have gaps in potentially our upsell process? What are we seeing there? How do we structure that? And pulling that in place. So there's a level of, confidence. And one of the things that I think tends to hinder people the most is they sit down and they say, we want this report, we want this dashboard, we want this thing, and we want all of this, right? And generally, like the approach that I take is like, pick the 5 things that you need to have done right. And one of the first questions I've started asking is like, how do you define a customer? Let's start and make sure we're aligned on definitions of data and like what these things mean. Because if marketing is defining a customer as something different than sales, then different than product, then different than CSMs, you've got a whole other situation in front of you. So start with the definitions, make sure aligned on core definitions that you're going to use across all your analytics, and then start layering in your metrics and dimensions and continuing to align on that. But I think a lot of people spend so much time creating the dashboard, creating the report, creating the information that they don't actually think about using it and don't actually start using it. How valuable is a Looker dashboard to a sales rep? Generally not super valuable versus putting something within a platform that they can action off of and start changing behavior.
Yeah, I mean, that's having data that you can do something with versus just, seeing the data is one thing. Actually understanding what that data should inform is, I think that's really that divide between RevOps and even data teams. It's, RevOps, their responsibility is to interpret the data. Data teams are to deliver it. When it comes to, you kind of touched on, one example of next best action or like scoring. But when it comes to, I'd like to talk through like one example that, let's say like a KPI or key. I don't know if either of you operate with, some North Star metric. But when it comes to measuring success of, either of you can give an example, and I'll start with you, Paul, around a KPI that, has been operationalized within your organization. But to get to that point, there are simple KPIs like how many people are converting on my website. I'd even call that more of a metric. But there's KPIs that are, that aggregate of, one example might be a customer health score, which is an aggregate of metrics that have to come from many different places. To have that holistic awareness of customer health, it's how are they engaging on your website? What are they doing in your product? Have they contacted support? What's their overall experience? It's many different points. Lots of different systems are collecting that information. And so, Paul, you can give another example, or I don't know if you're doing customer health scores, but I'd love to hear how you have tackled, a new KPI where you had to work with your data teams to, get these blind areas into this KPI.
Yeah, that's a fun and interesting one. I think the best example that I would point to is way back in the days at Marketo when we were working to establish a full journey score path that said, there's marketing engagement. We wanted to score and rate marketing engagement, which obviously marketing teams have done for a very long time. But we wanted to extend that similar model to sales engagement, support engagement, knowledge engagement, and have all four of those pillars be informative of a renewal propensity type model that says, well, customer was extremely excited in the marketing cycle. They were pretty actively engaged in the sales cycle. The implementation was done. We saw 120 days of activity within the product. But since then, we went from 9 active users to 2 active users, and those users have become less and less active. The content that they're navigating on the support portal is all very low complexity content, so they're obviously not using the higher ends of the product. So when the CSM is trying to convince their management that the customer's absolutely going to renew, the indicators are all there to show, no, it's likely not going to happen. And I think, though, if I take the framework of the notion of having KPIs and complex KPIs, as this one was for a renewal, the challenge I see today, particularly in our, the journey we've all been on for the last 3 years, is how to effectively craft relevant KPIs, because the rule books can periodically get thrown out. The behaviors of prospects, customers, and employees can have unexpected consequences on what seemed to be a stable model in the past. So I think that it's a matter of ensuring that there is enough operational flexibility in the definitions of a framework for establishing a KPI to be able to respond when the data patterns don't support the assumptions that you're looking for. I think too quickly people leap to conclusions because they're seeing data, and they don't think too much about whether or not the data model and the technologies surfacing this data might be surfacing irrelevant data. One of the questions that was asked in the chat here was, what's the best period, or what's an optimal period of time to consider the effectiveness of a marketing campaign? Time is one dimension, but also the volume of responses is another. But then there are all sorts of other variables that are so important to consider when you're trying to determine whether or not a campaign is effective. Did you target it at the right audience? It could be that it was an absolutely great campaign with really relevant messaging that you just happened to aim at the wrong people. And so you might throw the campaign out the door, but that wasn't the statistical issue that was really relevant. Anyway, I can wander along on this topic for quite a while, as you can tell. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's no small thing to align an organization around a KPI, let alone figure out how to get to that KPI. But you mentioned it being nimble, because I never worked at a company that made any assumptions that were either made false or had to be changed. And so getting to point A is step one, right? It's optimizing, refining, and making sure that you don't just live with that KPI for the rest of your life. You need to understand, what parts of it are working, and then of course how it's, is it informing the right actions that are going to make a real difference?
Yep.
You can't, you've got to have a baseline to work off of and challenge against, right? And you can't improve what you don't track and what you don't measure. So you've got to start somewhere, but not have the rigidness to not adapt and not to, continue to question. as well, especially as your business changes and evolves. What you looked at 100 million is going to be very different than what you're going to look at or 1 million versus 100 million.
Right.
Exactly. Molly, similar question, but I'm curious, is there something that you're trying to do? Like, is there a metric or a key KPI that, you folks feel that, okay, we should be looking at this, and how you're going about trying to accomplish that? I'm assuming like no one has done everything that they want to do. So there's got to be some stuff, that you're trying to tackle.
Yeah, I think there's, several things that we'll continue to try to tackle, especially as our product evolves. And I know, there were some PLG conversations in the chat, but really as we think about, how we continue to fold in product usage information as an indicator and start to build out metrics based on, and to Paul's point, what are they doing? What is happening in the product, or what's not happening and the product, and how should we understand how that should drive our right interactions and our next best actions, whether that's through automation or through human engagement, and start to prioritize tier and action off of those are always things that will continue to shape as we define the right customer experience. And again, I think it's there's a lot of really I always think about there's a lot of really cool things you can do, but there's really a few things that you should do. Right. And so really finding that balance and going back to what is the experience that our customers expect, and making sure that we're meeting them where they want to be met.
Yeah, I love the PLG stories, and whether you are whether you've fully embraced a PLG motion, you might be a direct sales org. If you have software, you better be doing something with how, with the data around how users are engaging with that software, because there's a whole treasure trove of insights that could be extracted from that. For you, Molly, when you mentioned, that there are some KPIs that you're trying to tackle, but how are you working with your data team? Like, are they giving you a place to access that data, or do you have a process in place where when you need product data, where to go to get it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure they're not super thrilled that they give me access to it, right? But if you're in RevOps and you don't know how to write SQL, highly recommend you start arming yourself with W3 School and be able to self-service on a read-only level. It's not that I'm going in and they're not letting me build pipelines, maybe someday, but probably not. But being able to self-service, validating the data that I need and understanding the construct. So as they've done a phenomenal job of building, the right data dictionary, the right data documentation, understanding, the DBT setup that I need to go in, so I can self-service, right? And I think that was a very smart thing of the data team, that they don't want to be the blocker of educating and building knowledge across stakeholders to be able to self-service. So being able to go into Snowflake, run my own queries, and Looker, run my own queries and see what I need to see and make the small adjustments that I need to. If they were a 2,000 person company, if every single person had to ask them to say, add another dimension into this or adjust this, that's all they do all day. So they've done a nice job at building in self-service components to be able to access the data and validate the data, which I think is huge. Same thing like any RevOps people on here. Same thing you want to do. You don't want to spend all day building Salesforce reports. Teach your stakeholders how to fish. Help them understand, put the right documentation in place so that they can self-learn, self-engage, self-action.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we see a lot at Syncream. I mean, that's a big part of what we do, which is a central unified data repository that no code experts can access. But I know that there are people who are very proficient with SQL. That there's plenty of things that you can do faster with more flexibility with SQL. I do think that, and I'm curious, maybe in either of your experiences, how often you find yourself working with, or with peers that are SQL experts, that are on the operations side. In my experience, it's fairly rare. But it is becoming a skill set that more and more people realizing that they need to learn and adopt. But when you don't have that skill set, do you like Paul, do you find yourself reliant heavily on data teams each time you need new data to give you access to it? Or do you have, Molly sounds like she's in a good spot. She can jump into Snowflake. She can do some of her own stuff. I think a lot of folks who especially don't have data teams, don't necessarily have that access. Would you say you're in that boat, Paul, or are you lucky like Molly? I know you've got Snowflake, but
Yeah, so I think the discussion is really around the democratization of data skills and then the availability of access and understanding of what the data is. So, obviously Molly has a very robust set of skills and a very strong maturity, experience of maturity that leads to a high degree of competency to look at the data, know where to look, and understand what the data shows. In our organization, as I said, the repositories are really just being established. I have to be careful here. I'm pretty sure there's no one from OneTrust on this call, but if it's being recorded, I don't want to say things that'll come back and get me in trouble. But the relevance of the data, regardless of the skills to access it, the ease of consumption of the data dictionary to know what data is sitting in what table and whatnot. The critical dimension in OneTrust's instance is it's data from 5 different brands that all had different definitions of customer lifecycle, that had different ways of tracking information, that has been consolidated into a single repository. So if you're looking for, as a simple thing, the lead statuses, and you want to see the historical status that an individual record has traveled through, one of our brands, Conversant, didn't use the leads object at all. And the contact object was where everything resided, and their definition of life cycle stages was very different than the definitions we're using today. So when we brought the data over, we aligned the pick list values so that it all made sense today. If you're looking at that data and you don't understand the history and the legacy of the data that you're looking at, you may make a set of very bad assumptions when you pull your query and start analyzing the results. So I think that, as Molly was talking about it, it's not only the technical skills of pulling the information and getting it into a place where you can analyze it. It's understanding what's the legacy of the data that's there. What is the transformation? What's the transformative journey that the data itself has taken in our circumstance? And Molly alluded to acquisitions and new data coming in. So you have that to look forward to, is how do you normalize from different places? But again, it's complicated.
Well, and it's just even, if you look at something like, revenue as an example, right? And you start looking at, ASP by product over time, and you have a price increase 12 months ago and you see this peak, like you have, you have to understand like the narration behind what the data is saying. You might look at that and be like, man, we just started crushing it.
Yeah,
and like that's
whatever
what
those
happened.
campaigns were that we were doing at that same time, let's do more of those campaigns. Well, there was a pretty false assumption.
Yeah, and so like you have to understand the situational components that go into the data behind it too, and that is something that like doesn't come from running the SQL query, right? That doesn't come from the piece, and like you have to have the business context around that. And like one of the things that I think businesses, quite frankly, I'm going to say suck, but that's the word you're going to get today, is documenting that. So when you do your annual planning and you are building your models and you are starting to look at historicals, like putting the right footnotes into that, so you have that legacy and you have that historical context behind things, so you know why you're making the decisions you're making and why you made these decisions based off data. The other piece that I was going to add on this is, right, like I can write, I can't, but like I could write the best SQL, so cool all day, starting pulling things together. But if I don't understand like the foundational structure of how the integration and the table was constructed and the sources behind it, I'm not going to get as far as I need to, because again, I might be making data decisions off of assumption and building things off of assumption, right? So I think that still goes back to the whole point on documentation and making sure you really have clear clear alignment on your documentation and what's going into it. It's the junk in, junk out. Same thing with what you're building there.
Yeah, I mean, you both explained like things that we do as as yourselves as operations professionals in giving yourselves more context, and I'm going to kind of take the data quality angle, but like understanding where the data came from, how old it is, the lineage of that data. That's the things that we can do in ensuring that that awareness around those items can inform, okay, you can make some changes to like, all right, maybe I don't want data that's that old, or maybe I don't need data from this system. But when it comes to your data teams, around the topic of like data quality, what is it that you are hoping your data team is doing to ensure that, once the data gets to you, you have that confidence and trust that, that data has gone through all the steps to the point where and have that confidence and trust that it's it is what it is trying to represent.
I mean, it goes back to chicken and egg, right? It goes back to the documentation. I want to be able to know that they've documented what they've put in place, and like we've reviewed that. One of the things that we do is when we are standing up a new data product, it's before they build anything, right? We have the alignment, we have that this is the KPI, this is the source of the data that's going into it. These are the tables that we're going to use from Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever piece, and this is the attribute, right? And really spending the time to document that. The other thing that I, really harp on is like the scalability of the infrastructure that we build, and like the less we can hard code, the better within our SQL and within that, because that just makes my life horrible anytime I add a new pick list value and they have to go and like make an adjustment to the SQL. So like being really mindful of, what is the scalability of the data product that you're trying to build. And, you're building something for today, but how do you not have to recreate it for tomorrow when your business evolves too?
Seems like one assumption that we can always, all make and all the time is things are going to change.
Oh yeah. Whatever. And the more you can have the source of the data be actually the source in the SQL versus the manipulation, the better.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So a few things, yeah, we've discussed a lot of things that you folks are working with data teams on. I'm curious, I'd love to hear an example of, where have been some like significant challenges in engaging your data teams, beyond prioritization, because we kind of touched on that. That's always going to be a challenge, but aligning around, whether it's delivering data or, data quality. Paul, we'll start with you. Just an example of like, what would you love to get, what would you love to see change in how you engage with your data teams? And I mean, there's always this one part, everyone wants more access to their data. So that's probably a given, but more specifically, what is it that you wish you had, like wish you could get out of your data team, or wish that you were able to collaborate more effectively with your data team on?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you take away my ability to rely on the best answers, but and again, I'm going to be a little bit mindful of the way that I phrase this, because it's not intended to be critical. I think that, as in many parts of an operations-based business, and that's the business that we're in Revops, the understanding of business context is a skill that, luckily in my experience, I've partnered with some very robust data operations teams that have data architects who understand the business operations and the business itself. So their lens on data isn't pure digital. Their understanding and their lens on data is contextual for business. But I would suggest, in my prior experience as a solution architect, the ability to understand and have contextual knowledge around raw data is a skill that many data operations teams lack. And it is the art of what that business and function needs, where having the fundamental appreciation, understanding of the data architecture, where data resides, what its sources are, having that robust engineering lens is 70% of what that team should be skilled at. But the remaining 30%, if we call that the art of context and understanding the importance, what Molly was talking about in terms of documentation, that's the equivalent that I find is often missing in those teams, because it's very hard to hire for. It's generally knowledge that only comes through operational wisdom of time, where you've seen the data involved, so you understand what that data's journey has been. But I would say, I would highlight that as being an area of operational challenge that that I've encountered many times.
Yeah, the first thing I thought when Aaron asked, what do I wish that our team, I was like, I really just want to say I wish they knew Salesforce, right? But I know that that's not, there's a fine balance in that, right? Of, sometimes it's good to not know, so you're not making the assumptions, right? And it's important to ask, but then on the flip side, it's, it's less about knowing Salesforce. Sorry, that was probably a bad way to say it, but understanding like the business context behind this and the processes, right? Because there's such a byproduct and like such a downstream output of this, that like by not understanding, the top level, there's likely things we're missing, and some of that context would come in to help to challenge in some situations. So it's kind of, ignorance is bliss, but then there's also, pros of knowing it, because I think you still then can help contribute at a different level.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're both echoing the difference between, really working with your data teams as true collaborators, because they understand the context of how that data is going to be used. They understand what decisions it's going to be informed, versus people who are responsible for just giving you numbers or just giving you data.
Right.
Because there's always something that, we all have our blinders on. We all have our own objectives and are, super focused on one thing. And to have someone who knows how that data is going to be used and what decisions it might be driving is going to also help them, inform themselves. Like maybe there's a different way to go about this. Maybe there are some, blind spots that I'm not being asked to uncover, but probably should.
Yeah, no, and Molly, I think the reference to Salesforce, the moment you said that, I had a little PTSD related to some of the challenges back from when Marketo was acquired by Adobe. And I had the opportunity to wander around Adobe's instance of Salesforce. And let me just tell you, I think Adobe needs a gold star for having the most hairy, messy instance of Salesforce that I think exists. And they're in the middle of a migration to Dynamics that's almost 3.5 years old right now. But I did not know. I mean, I think we've all encountered the fact that you get a maximum number of custom fields that you can build on standard objects in Salesforce, and the number is 800. Well, Adobe has maxed out the custom field count on leads, accounts, contacts, opportunity, campaign members. So, I mean, right there, that's impressive.
So the solution is just to build some custom objects to have more custom fields.
So Adobe followed that path. There are 1,800 custom objects in Adobe's Salesforce instance. So if you have a data team that doesn't understand the operational limitations of a system like Salesforce, they may make assumptions about the data that they're pulling from that system without respecting or understanding the operational limitations that system itself puts on the data.
Yep.
So
I just still, and this is every data team I've ever worked with, not a deal, leads versus contacts, right? like the concept of how a lead converts to a contact in an account, like if you have not lived and breathed that in like a CRM instance, you will not understand it in like a data infrastructure. And I can't tell you how many times I've like recorded a Zoom of like, this is a lead, this is a contact, this is what the difference is, here's how they work. And that goes back to like the process, right? And how the technology supports the process.
Right.
So we're almost towards the end. We've got about 7 minutes left, and I wanted to shift gears just a little bit and touch on, things to like, what happens when I don't have a data team? I think there's probably folks on this call that, you're both lucky where you've got, resources, you've got other people who are responsible for these, certain silos of responsibilities and data. But when you don't have a data team, what might be some things, what are some table stakes that a, non-data engineer or data scientist can do? If you're in RevOps or marketing ops, we'll start with you, Molly. Like, what would be a good starting point to become a little bit more data proficient, to get more mature around how you leverage your data, yet you don't have a data team. So you're kind of bound by the tools, probably more the like user tools that you're using today, like your Salesforce or your HubSpot.
Yeah, and you don't have to be like a data engineer to use that data, right? You have kind of the native reporting functionality within CRM, within your HubSpot, within your marketing automation, within your platform that you can join. And so when you get to the point that you probably exhaust that sophistication, it's, how do you stand up a data lake out of warehouse, right, at a light level to start to integrate that data together? There's a lot of, if you're using, I'm going to say the words, like if you're using standard tools, right? This is probably a whole different conversation if you've got a bunch of homegrown pieces or, tools that don't necessarily have strong APIs to them. It's really easy to start to feed data together. Obviously, your volume of data is going to come into play, as well as, the security around your data. I wouldn't be like, hey, go drop everything you own in a Google Sheet, right? But building the right, infrastructure to be able to start doing some light data analytics. There's, Google's visualization tool. What is it? It's
Looker.
It's not Looker. It's conjoined to BigQuery, very front end, very easy to use. To just start doing some like beginning visualization pieces. There's like, poor man's data analytics. Start there. Like look at this in the way that you don't have to sit down and say like, I need to be a proficient data scientist, data engineer. Like look at citizen development. Figure out the things that you can use to bring things together to get you the information you need. At the end of the day, like what you're probably trying to do is join different pieces of data to tell the story. So define what that story is and what that narrative is that you're trying to get to, and work backwards from that. If you go into this and saying like, I just need to bring everything in place, like you're going to sit and drown.
Yeah. And how about for you, Paul, like, especially since you've also, you're on the marketing side. And so there's activation, the whole activation orchestration side that you deal with, beyond, the tools that you use, because, you can you can log into your tool and you can get analytics with the blinders on specific to what that tool is doing.
Analytics.
Yeah, exactly. And the maturity of the level of analytics for each tool varies. When you're making a decision on two things, like making a decision on, someone interacted with your website and they signed up for a free trial and set up one thing. Like without a data team, what are you using to get the awareness of, well, you have a data team, but if you didn't, like, what would be a good starting point for making decisions off of this combined data?
Well, I'd say there's two elements to that. The first is to Molly's earlier point about the data literacy components. I think it's important in this first element to understand what are the data capabilities of the platforms you're residing in. So, if you're in an ecosystem with Marketing Cloud and Salesforce, there's a capability to look in from the outside. So if you want to be able to do more and see more, there's a skill set you might want to self-develop on related to SQL, related to being able to extract data and then be able to use it elsewhere. So think about the systems you have and really try to understand the accessibility of more information. Because to your point, Aaron, if you log in, you're in the lens of the product itself and the limitations of what that lens allows. So find out if there's capabilities or ways that you can get around the product itself to see the data that the product lives and breathes on top of. So that's one element. But honestly, the other element that I would encourage everybody to do is talk more about data, talk more about the significance of data on operations, talk about the discipline of data and the benefits of having a repository like a Snowflake or Redshift or something where data resides, and move your organization with you on the journey of understanding data as a component. I think that that's the evolution. And when I think about this community that has been spun up, I love the challenge of people talking more about data and the respect and understanding of what happens with data. That data is a living resource that's accessible and available across multiple parts of the business. And its quality has a direct impact on the effectiveness of various phases of the customer journey. So
I love that. I mean, just understanding the story, like when it comes to, I'm sure you all work with leadership, and we ran a report where, you know, we found that the trust in data was very different between the people who were responsible for the data versus the executives who are consuming the data. And that gap in trust is just this, not, you know, leadership not being aware of, like, what did it take to get to this, you know, this data point. Like, I think any data professional or ops professional loves the idea of, you know, exposing all the effort that went into getting to this point.
right.
And what you're talking about is, you know, really conveying that effort and that understanding of how we got there to a wider audience within an organization, which will like level up both education and trust in that data.
Yep.
Well, we're at time, so I think this concludes our session, and I want to thank you, Paul and Molly. This has been a fantastic chat. It's been a pleasure speaking with you guys for the first time here on RevGenius. So with that, I will end this session.
Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
Thanks so much.
Good to chat, Molly. Thanks,
Take
Aaron.
care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.